Welcome back to No Fear Equity, a series where we break down all things equity and startup financing in terms that are easy to understand. In this episode, we're going to talk about a really common question among startup founders. How does an employee option pool work? And when I create one, how big should it be? Let's get into it. Okay, so you're raising funds for your startup and you're reviewing a term sheet from an investor. And for the purpose of this example, let's pretend it's your first priced round, so a seed or a Series A. Typically at this stage, the investor will put some language in the term sheet that requires you to carve out an option pool, which is a fixed percentage of the company's shares that you're going to set aside for employees in the future. Now, what a lot of founders don't realize is that the size of this option pool is actually an important negotiating lever for the investor. How you size your option pool can have a real effect on how your ownership as a founder is diluted. So in order for us to think about how to size that option pool, it's important for us to first take a step back and understand how dilution works. All right, so one thing that we find a lot of early stage founders don't necessarily understand is that when you raise a round of financing and give a percentage of your company to an investor, you're not handing that investor a bunch of shares that already existed. Instead, what you're doing is magically creating a whole new batch of shares and handing over those shares to the investor. This is how dilution works. All the current shareholders keep the exact same number of shares that they already have, but since you've now added a bunch of new shares into the picture, your personal shares now represent a smaller percentage of the whole pie. Okay, so I know that was probably a little hairy, so to make it crystal clear, let's see an example. Say you have a business where you own 100% of the company. So just for simplicity, we'll say that your company has 8 million shares total and you own 100% of those shares. But now you're raising your Series A. You have one investor. She's a nice lady. Her name is Jennifer. Jennifer gives you some money, and in exchange, you agree to give her 20% of the company. But remember, that 20% is not coming out of the 8 million shares that already exist. Instead, you're going to magically create a bunch of new shares and give them to Jennifer so that she ultimately has 20% of the new total. You're going to keep the same number of shares personally, but your percentage is going to be diluted from 100% down to 80%. Now we can skip the whole math equation of it, but ultimately here's how it all shakes out. You keep your 8 million shares. That doesn't change. You then create 2 million new shares and give them to Jennifer. This means your company now has 10 million shares total, with Jennifer owning 20% and you owning 80%. And this is what dilution means. Before Jennifer showed up, you owned 100% of the company, but now that she's come in as an investor, you still own the same number of shares that you had before, but your percentage has been diluted down to 80%. And understanding this is a key part of understanding how you can be diluted by an option pool. Okay, so let's use the same scenario, but now we're gonna add valuations into the mix. So today you have that same business, 8 million shares, and you own 100% of those shares. Jennifer comes in and tells you that she'd like to make the same investment, $2 million, and she'd like to do it on an $8 million pre-money valuation. Now, if you've watched our other episodes, you'll remember that what Jennifer is basically saying here is, hey, today I believe your company is worth $8 million before I give you any money. That's why it's a pre-money valuation. It's the value of your company before the investment comes in. Jennifer's then going to give you another $2 million, and your post-money valuation will be $10 million total. So this is great. Jennifer's just done an awesome thing. She valued your company at $8 million today. And since today there are 8 million shares in total, that means each share of your company is officially worth $1, right? Well, not so fast. You then read a little further down the term sheet and you notice a clause that says this.
A pre-money valuation of $8 million, including an employee option pool representing 10% of the fully diluted post-money capitalization.
Okay, whoa. This clause is actually really important because it's talking about the option pool that Jennifer wants you to set up. So let's break it down. Now remember, your pre-money valuation is $8 million and your post-money valuation is $10 million. What the term sheet is basically saying is that the option pool will amount to 10% of the post-money valuation. 10% of $10 million is $1 million, so you essentially have a $1 million option pool. But here's the thing. that $1 million option pool is actually being included in the pre-money valuation, which means that while your pre-money on paper is technically $8 million, the actual pre-money valuation is $7 million, plus a brand new option pool of $1 million that you're now creating. Okay, but what does that mean? Well, it means that Jennifer wants you to create that option pool before her investment gets added on, which means the option pool is coming out of your personal equity because when you create the option pool, she hasn't actually come on board yet. Or in other words, you're getting diluted. This is a common little trick, which is why it's important to know that when you're talking about valuations, there's a difference between the stated pre-money valuation and the effective pre-money valuation. In this term sheet, your stated pre-money valuation is $8 million, but your effective pre-money valuation is actually $7 million, plus this new option pool of $1 million that you're now creating. Once that option pool has been created, then Jennifer's going to put in her investment of $2 million and your post-money valuation will amount to $10 million total. Okay, so let's return to share price. Remember when we thought that it was going to be $1 a share? Well, by this new math, your effective pre-money valuation is $7 million. And when you divide that $7 million valuation by 8 million total shares, then your share price today isn't actually $1. It's 87.5 cents. Now, this is a lot of fancy number talk, but the big takeaway is that typically when an investor asks you to create an option pool, it's going to dilute you and your current shareholders directly. And this is an important thing to consider when you think about how you're going to size your option pool. Okay, so now the $1 million question. How big should your option pool be? And yes, it does depend on the particulars of your situation, and you should definitely talk to your legal team about it before making any decisions. But that being said, it is critical to be thinking in the right way about how you're planning to size your option pool. And part of that thinking is understanding how that option pool is probably going to dilute you directly. Now, the investor is typically going to try to negotiate for the biggest option pool possible. They'll shoot for 12%, 15%, 20%, and the reason that they do that is because they're protecting themselves from dilution. The more they can dilute you up front, the less they'll have to be diluted in the future when you raise more money, etc. So knowing that the option pool is going to directly impact your ownership percentage, it may be in your best interest to try and bring the size of that option pool down to exactly what you need for this next phase of your business and nothing else. Okay, so how do you figure that out? Well, this option pool is being created so that you can give equity to future employees, right? So the most useful thing you can do is carefully plan your hiring and compensation strategy between now and your next funding round. How many people are you going to hire? How much equity are you going to give them? And how much padding do you think you'll need for unknown scenarios? This way, instead of blindly accepting whatever number the investor throws at you, you can actually say, hey, I know exactly how big the option pool needs to be because I know exactly how many people I need to hire and give equity to in this next stage. Now, obviously, hiring and compensation strategy can be a whole beast by itself, but luckily here at Carta, we also help with that. Check out the next video downstairs in the description where we talk with a real VC about hiring philosophy, how much you should be thinking about paying employees at different stages, and generally just how to build a solid compensation strategy. Knowing this stuff can make a real difference when it comes time to think about how to size the option pool, and if you do everything right, it can be really helpful toward avoiding dilution and maintaining your ownership as a founder. For more helpful tips and explainers just like this one, check out our Founder Resource Center. It's got all kinds of useful tools and information about all things equity, fundraising, and building a startup. And as always, thanks for watching No Fear Equity. We hope you found this video helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.